Principles of protection. This presentation is designed to stimulate discussion about the philosophy of protecting an independent Scotland. If you want to ask questions, you could please enter a capital Q in the chat with your question. We'll try to pick up on those in the panel discussions. And to give us feedback, please comment on anything you particularly agree or disagree with. So, a map of all the countries belonging to the United Nations. And Scotland will do as others do, because all countries defend themselves, and they all make different choices for themselves. They all freely set their own priorities, and we have to ask ourselves, are any other nations less safe than the UK? For instance, are Norway, Denmark, or Ireland less safe, even if they're not in the UK? And no countries follow exactly the same path. And Scotland will be no different from anyone else. But it'll be your choice alone, because Scotland's defence policy will be set by those who we elect. And those decisions will be made in Scotland based on Scotland's choices. We'll not be dragged by others into illegal wars. We'll decide when we go to war and no one else. Because we are not subjects, we're citizens and our leaders serve us. So you and you alone will decide how we protect ourselves. And following the rule of law under the control of Parliament, not government. And it will be vital that we have a written Scottish Constitution, which will be essential for a modern progressive country. And under that Constitution, it will make clear the role of all our protected services. We should have a commitment to strengthening all the international institutions, and we should support international law, bodies, treaties, and agreements. But we mustn't be blind to or bound by the flaws of those bodies or self-interest. For example, of permanent members of the Security Council of the United Nations vetoing criticism of the unacceptable actions of their allies. We must uphold the common good and always remember who guards the guards themselves. Scotland wants to be one of the good players, remembering that containment is better than confrontation. We can, like Norway, be seen as a facilitator of peace, not an instigator of aggression. And so we should apply our principles with integrity, but we've got to be prepared to be robust. And playing the long game, because patience is a virtue, we must undertake to reinforce our shared values and foster mutual trust and respect with all other countries. And remember, always better the carrot than the stick. The immortal words of the Declaration of Arbroath. But should we be protecting not only our freedom, but also those of others? We're a small country, so joint capability and alliance will be at the heart of our defence. And we should be judged not only on how much we spend, but our willingness to sacrifice for common causes. And that may require us to make sacrifices for the sake of others. But freedom's not only our right, it's a right of all. A fine picture of the round table of the Security Council of the United Nations. But we do not accept the principle of the seat at the top table. We advocate the round table where all are equal, irrespective of size. Did you know, for instance, that currently Ireland, Norway, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines are current members of the Security Council, and Estonia, population 1.3 million, has its presidency. We don't want to punch above our weight. We don't want to punch anybody unless we have to. Brexit shows the value in solidarity, and mutual strength comes from mutual respect. So we should only do as much as we have to, avoiding conflict through diplomacy and negotiation, and focusing on stability, rather than absolute security, because there can be no absolute security, and one nation's attempt to achieve absolute security represents another nation's absolute insecurity. As we've said before, prevent conflict by deterrence, and use sufficient strength to prevent but not to dominate. Deter, not defeat. Apply minimum force and only when we have to, and counter threats, not become one. So, no nation can stand alone, no nation should, and Scotland will not be isolationist. We should share a defence based on our shared principles, alliances as central to our security, and remember, Trident is no ultimate guarantee. There can be none. Nuclear weapons, in fact, encourage proxy wars. They don't protect us from attacks like 9/11, London Underground, or Manchester Arena, or indeed cyber attacks on Scotland's essential infrastructure like SEPA and NHS. We'll have to accept the responsibilities of NATO membership and share and accept the consequences of those choices. Our relations should be based on our principles, and we apply them equally to friends and enemies. So we'll have to hold ourselves and allies to the highest standards and champion the four essential freedoms of human rights, free press, independent judiciary, and rights of ownership. And we must treat all other nations as we ourselves expect to be treated. And always behave with dignity and respect for others. This covers all of our society, from our health service, our protection services like Police Scotland, Fire and Rescue, and indeed the Scottish Defence Force. And within the next 5 years, we're told we'll have a national care service as well as being protected otherwise. And COVID has reinforced the importance of the NHS, but all our protected services will be part of civic society, as we can see right now as our armed forces assist the NHS in the delivery of vaccines. But they must be bound by the same laws, structures and rules as civic society. So our armed forces will have to abide by strict rules of engagement set by our Parliament and government. And unlike the proposals of the last UK government, there should be no immunity from prosecution for carrying out illegal acts by our service people. So those four equal services will be provided for the nation: health, care, emergency, defence and protection. And they'll all be as much part of our daily lives as the NHS. And those who serve us deserve to be served by us. So we have a duty to our service personnel, which is not to put them in harm's way without due cause. They're entitled to public support prior to being committed to action. So we won't just be sending them out and then telling the public to rally round the flag and supporting them, irrespective of the legality of their action. If they come in harm's way in our service, whether it's physical or mental trauma, we'll always support them and ensure that they're fully integrated into society after service. We shouldn't see our ex-service people homeless and begging on the streets, as happens at the moment, and there shouldn't be any need for charities like Health for Heroes. Our civic society has a duty to people when they've put their lives on the line for us. So those who serve will be served. The three priorities will be the defence of our country, protection of our citizens, and the welfare of those who serve. We mustn't play politics with defence, and those priorities should be above the interests of politics, shareholders and trade unions. So we mustn't let politicians use the unions and jobs to further their own political interests. We should care more for those who actually bear our arms than those who make them. We'll have to procure our equipment from the very best sources so that we buy the best, for the best, from the best. Knowing your enemy is absolutely essential, and we've got to understand what motivates others. For example, Russia. Invaded by Sweden in the 18th century, France and UK in the 19th century, Germany in the 20th century, and each time they lost millions, if not tens of millions of their citizens. Is it any wonder they're paranoid about their defence and worried about encroachment from the West? Similarly, Iran, whose democratically elected government was overthrown by a plot motivated by the CIA at the request of the UK. Or North Korea, which lost a quarter of its entire population during the Korean War. And is it any wonder that they seek what they regard as the ultimate deterrent to stop it potentially happening again? So don't judge other countries by our own fears and try to understand their imperatives. Focus on containment and not conflict, and communicate our own motives effectively. We didn't do that in 1981 and 1982, and thereby encouraged the invasion of the Falklands by Argentina. And finally, don't underestimate the resolve of others. Afghanistan has resisted invasion by Britain in the 19th century and Russia in the 20th and USA in the 21st. Vietnam resisted France, USA and China, so never underestimate the resolve of even a very small and weakly defended country. So don't prejudge, take time to understand others. So in conclusion, this is a presentation, is a basis for discussion, but we feel we'll have to forge our own identity, nurture our own values, and apply them consistently when we deal with others. We should be a facilitator of peace and freedom, but prepared to defend it if needed. So what is the balance between protecting Scotland and freedom for all? So that concludes my presentation. This has been a team effort. A number of people have contributed to this presentation. Those are the various topics that have been covered during it. Any questions you have, please put them in the chat. Any comments, observations, put them in the chat also, and we'll try to pick up on them later on in the panel discussions. So thanks very much for your attention.
Hello, I'm Isabel Lindsay, and I have been campaigning on peace and disarmament issues since 1960. I'm currently a vice chair of Scottish CND, but the paper I'm going to discuss is one that has been prepared as part of the Transitions to Independence series of policy papers on behalf of the Scottish Independence Convention, and the full paper is available on their website, together with a range of other transition papers. So what we were trying to do, what we hope to do, is to say we have to make preparations well in advance for that transition to independence. But that also involves looking, especially in an area like defence, foreign policy, it involves looking at what our future role should be, how we put in place, how we transition to the means to achieve those positive objectives. For far too many centuries, Scottish armed forces have been used for doing bad things on behalf of the British state. What we want to do is to try and ensure that in the future, with an independent Scotland, they are doing good things from a humanitarian perspective for all of us. And I think when we consider language, we should be using the language of Scottish security rather than just talking about Scottish defence policy, and putting our plans into the context of a wider Scottish security context. And we are suggesting that we should be establishing something we could start with now, a Secure Scotland Commission, to try to assess the whole context of risk and how we plan for it, how we protect. And it's into that context that Scottish Defence Forces would fit. So it would be in that broader context. And this would give us the opportunity for really looking at what are the existential risks that we might face with Scotland. How best do we plan for it and approach? Because we have certainly been in a situation, as you know, we have seen currently, where we spent billions on aircraft carriers, one of which is going out to the South China Seas just now, but we didn't prepare for a health pandemic, although we knew that was a possibility on the horizon. So we want to assess the context of risk, and coming down the line, we have climate change and all the implications there. We have our enormous over-dependence building up on cybersecurity. So it's both cyber failure, cyber attack we may have to deal with. We have, of course, great marine resources, which are going to, in terms of renewable energy, increase even as oil diminishes. And we have coastal security to consider. And we have, of course, one of our great risk factors we have in Scotland currently around 180 nuclear bombs in the Central Belt. And this is going to go up to 260 in the near future. That's just been announced. This is an enormous risk, and we have all of the delivery systems. So how do we begin to approach these? And on the nuclear question, I think it is absolutely essential, and the SNP, the Greens, many others are now supportive of the new Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the UN treaty. And this would ensure, as independent Scotland ratifies it, that we would be acting to remove these nuclear weapons within an international context with UN support. And I believe that is something that has to be done, a clear timetable sorted out before we make a decision on NATO membership.
Hello, my name is Anthony Salamone. I'm the Managing Director of European Merchants, a political analysis firm based in Edinburgh, which I founded in 2019. I'm a political scientist. My areas of expertise focus on international relations, EU politics and institutions, and Scottish-UK politics. My work also covers US politics, European small states, and modern diplomatic strategy. As part of my work, I lead the Scottish State Builder Project, European Merchants' pioneering initiative to bring detailed expert analysis to major questions on independence. My most recent report, Scotland's Global Blueprint, sets out the path to build the institutions for a successful, values-based foreign policy under independence. Today, from my perspective as a political scientist, I'm going to talk about how I would think about defining Scotland's defence and security strategy as an independent state. First, on the principles for Scottish defence and security. I think it's important to be upfront that independence would be a transformational process for Scotland, requiring significant change across government and society. We should be honest that defence in particular is an area in which the current Scottish government has almost no role. Of course, we have active military personnel in Scotland, and we have veterans in Scotland, including participants of this conference. We also have current and retired civil servants with expertise in defence, security, and intelligence. However, in terms of the institutions of Scotland, which is the focus of the State Builder Project, we must recognise that the new government of Scotland, as it would be, would have to create the defence and security institutions of the state largely from scratch. By contrast, the Scottish Government does have expertise in some respects in security, through policing and justice. While perhaps daunting, creating these new institutions presents a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to build a Scottish state which reflects Scotland's values, interests, and priorities. Ensuring the safety and security and all their various facets of the public is often taken as the first priority of the state, and Scotland would be responsible for these in its own right. I would like to see Scotland, as a European state and a European small state, adopt a values-based and holistic approach to defence and security, just as it would on its foreign policy. These days, we talk about new challenges and corresponding methods to protect the state, from hybrid threats to non-traditional defence and security challenges, biosecurity, as we're all experiencing right now with the pandemic, to cybersecurity, to climate security. These are essential areas which require appropriate investment by the Scottish state. Nevertheless, one can also object to the increasing securitization of public affairs, such as we have seen with respect to migration here in Europe and elsewhere. I share that concern, where securitization promotes or leads to hostile policies, defensiveness, and misguided interpretations of the national interest. I am sure that we can all agree that Scotland should not entertain such a course. At the same time, we must recognise the real European and global defence and security environment which Scotland faces right now, and would face as an independent state. Worryingly, I have often detected a latent premise within our independence debate, the idea that, with the right amount of bon ami, we could be great friends with every state in the world. We, in this audience, know that is not the case. As a state, Scotland would face real defence and security challenges from state actors, not just the non-state actors whom we increasingly speak of these days. Regardless of the fact that Scotland would start with a positive or benign international reputation, if only for the fact that we have not been a state for so long, and therefore not been judged as one in respect of global affairs. That reality connects to the definition of Scotland's defence and security strategy. If, as I imagine it would be the case, the core priorities of the defence, security, and intelligence institutions of the state are to preserve Scotland as a free democratic state and to protect the Scottish way of life, that demands consideration of the full challenges that we would face. In line with the Constitution and its defining principles, such as civilian control of the military, we would develop the means to protect our democracy and our state. That would include the integrity of our elections and our democratic process, the maintenance of a free and independent media while also combating misinformation and disinformation, and maintaining the functionality of our infrastructure, including energy, water, and other public utilities. More broadly, fulfilling those core priorities also depends on the European and global systems which exist, which sustain us in so many respects, and which are changing. The success or failure of multilateralism, the future of the rules-based global system, and the evolution of the United Nations would all matter to our defense and security as much as to our foreign policy. Underpinning all of these developments is the ongoing competition between starkly different political value systems, which will shape the kind of world that we inhabit. On these questions, diplomacy would be at the center of our EU and international action. I would envisage and hope that the Department of Defence and the Department of European and External Relations, as I would call Scotland's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, would work very closely together in a spirit of genuine partnership. That cooperation would be imperative. We are too small to have American-style turf wars. That leads me to a recurring theme in our independence debate: neutrality. In today's world, neutrality is an outmoded and ineffective concept. Scotland is not neutral now, and it would make no sense to become neutral in the 2020s. As I have outlined, we would face challenges and threats across a range of areas, from traditional defence to the future of the UN and international law. We should not seek to declare ourselves neutral on any of these areas. For us, that would, I think, be an abdication of responsibility at a crucial time in world history. Fundamentally, neutrality would not protect us from anything, and only diminish our role in the world. So that takes us to perhaps the most notable and consequential defence and security question that Scotland would face as a state: our relationship with NATO. It is abundantly clear that NATO is a contentious subject within the independence movement, and even many of those who ostensibly support Scottish membership of NATO often whisper that view, at best. Nevertheless, I suspect that a clear majority of the Scottish public as a whole, beyond the independence movement, would support NATO membership. I approach the question of NATO membership in a threefold way. First, Scotland's defence and security requirements. In our immediate neighbourhood and on wider regional and global security issues, the alliance, which includes most EU member states, would support Scottish defence and security. Second, the defence and security of Scotland's allies, principally in the first instance, the other EU member states. NATO is foundational to the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, of Poland, and of others. Scotland, being part of NATO, would support them in their security and defence. Third, Scotland's role in the EU and the world beyond our direct defence and security. Cooperating through NATO with EU and non-EU allies would enhance Scotland's impact in the world. On all three measures, it's clear to me that an independent Scotland should join NATO. Being part of NATO would not conflict with Scotland's aspirations to contribute to global peacebuilding, whether through UN peacekeeping or other peace-related roles, as Norway, Canada, and other NATO members evidently demonstrate. I very much support the principle of Scotland being a nuclear weapons-free state, and I find that completely achievable while also being part of NATO. At the same time, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the TPNW, has also featured in our debate. The treaty has laudable aspirations which I imagine we can all support. However, honestly, given that all NATO members are outside the TPNW, it seems clear to me, at present at least, that NATO membership and the TPNW are incompatible. Our public debate currently does not account for this reality, and it needs to. If Scotland becomes independent, this will certainly not be the only question for which all the options available present some form of difficulty, but its choice is still required. In building the Scottish state, I think it would be vital to ensure that its political institutions operate with a genuine regard to the evolving views of the public. As I have proposed in Scotland's Global Blueprint, any application for Scotland to join an international organisation should require approval from the Parliament of Scotland. Accordingly, the Parliament would have to approve NATO membership for it to happen. Should differences of opinion make it warranted, it would also be possible to hold a NATO membership referendum to determine whether Scotland joined NATO. Deciding Scotland's approach on NATO should happen during the transition to independence. And as part of that transition, provided we agreed on NATO membership, it would be important to determine interim arrangements with NATO and the UK on the Scotland-NATO relationship at the point of independence, to cover from that point until Scotland's eventual accession to NATO. I hope and expect that Scotland, as an independent state, would seek to join the European Union. Defence and security cooperation are integral aspects of being part of the EU. As I set out in Scotland's EU blueprint, Scotland's EU accession process could reasonably take 4 to 5 years, from point of application to point of accession. It would be beneficial for Scotland's pre-accession relationship with the European Union, which I have recommended to be an EU-only association agreement, at least initially, to include appropriate defence and security cooperation, in addition to wider foreign policy cooperation. After accession, Scotland would fully participate in EU policies on defence and security. This work will take a multitude of forms. Scotland will be part of the EU's Common Security and Defence Policy, the CSDP. Officials and personnel would participate in council institutions, including the Political and Security Committee and the EU Military Committee. On wider internal security, Scotland would be part of various EU agencies and initiatives, including Europol, Eurojust, and, I hope, the Schengen Information System. Incidentally, our discussion here reinforces the importance of Scotland being part of the non-border aspects of the Schengen acquis, even if we are not part of the Schengen area, to maintain the common travel area with the UK, Ireland, and the other participants. Defence is an area where the EU is looking to do more, along with foreign policy. These developments are connected with the defining debates in Brussels and EU capitals on the concept of European strategic autonomy, including what it means in practice, and its place in the general future direction of the European Union. As an EU member state, Scotland would be an integral participant in these debates. As I have noted in some of my work, we are currently disadvantaged because Scottish politics is largely, if not wholly, disconnected from these crucial European debates. What would Scotland's position be on European strategic autonomy? On the development of wider European defence? What would Scotland's contributions be to European security? These are foundational questions related not just to Scotland's place in the EU, but our defence and security strategy. And here again, answers would be needed. Finally, it's important to consider Scotland's bilateral relationship with the United Kingdom on defence and security, how these two states would cooperate together. Conceptualizing the transition to independence requires significant work, and the next report in the State Builder project will cover the pathway to independence after an independence referendum. In my strong view, Scotland should aspire for positive and constructive bilateral relations with the UK, on defence and security as on other areas. Scotland should approach the relationship that way, regardless of the approach which the UK would take. While the mechanics of Scotland's separation and independence are still to be established, future defence and security cooperation could be part of the Principal Treaty, or it could be established through a freestanding agreement. Either way, this cooperation would surely function through the broader institutions that would be created to facilitate the new bilateral relationship. Naturally, these institutions and that cooperation would evolve in the decades after independence. The exact shape of that cooperation would be determined by the circumstances at the time. If we envisage a scenario in which Scotland has become independent, Scotland after a period is part of NATO and the UK is part of NATO, the two states are part of the common travel area along with Ireland, and both states have committed to working together to manage their shared island, we can see opportunities and indeed necessities for good bilateral cooperation on defence and security and on other issues. With Scotland as an EU member, such cooperation would of course be shaped by and need to accord with the relationship between the EU and the UK. Scotland and the UK would have markedly different EU and foreign policies. That would be a principal reason why Scotland was becoming independent. Cooperation should still be possible, and Scotland should endeavour to foster it. The emphasis should be on working through institutions, through NATO, the Common Travel Area, trilateral institutions with Ireland, and bilateral institutions directly between Scotland and the UK. Scotland's defence and security under independence are complex and vital issues. They require purposeful and detailed consideration. So much more remains to be discussed, areas which I haven't addressed today, including Scotland's contributions to UN peacekeeping operations, and our other security and democracy efforts, such as through the OSCE, the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe.